Okay, and yep, there we go, all recording. Hi everybody, welcome to another birthday special edition of In Conversation With. In this session, I'm joined by Paul White, who is a psychological therapeutic practitioner based in the US. Paul, good afternoon, good morning where you are. Welcome to an In Conversation. How's things going for you right now?
Well, good morning. Thank you. Yes, actually things are going pretty well. I think it's still um, a massive change that we're going through, but between my family and the clients that I'm seeing, I'd say most of us are weathering it pretty well, but there are some that are not so much. So, but that's why they come see me and others like myself.
And we've known each other for a little while now, and we've had various conversations over that time around how very different the attitude towards therapy, counselling is in the European field as compared to the US field. And I kind of really want to kind of explore that a little bit in this session. But as you mentioned, that there are some clients that are really struggling with the changes that are going on around us. How, as a professional stateside, are you finding that kind of transition among fellow professionals?
Yeah. So, great question. I think that's one of the things that, of all the stuff going on, it's kind of bothersome to me. Is I'm part of a psychotherapy organization here in California called the California Marriage and Family Therapists, and there's a branch in Los Angeles where I am, and we had been doing monthly meetings, doing like networking and just building community. Sometimes we do the monthly meeting would be uh, like earn extra education around various topics, and so we go to a place and have breakfast or a little brunch and learn something together. And then there are other meetings where we go to one of the people's houses, maybe like 20 or 30 of us just kind of hanging out, and it wasn't so much about networking but maintaining that community that we have as professionals, and also friendships. And obviously that hasn't happened since probably um, I think February is probably the last time anything like that happened, and I do really miss that.
Do you think that's had an impact on the professional community?
I
to
do.
to kind of push that a little bit further, I think if we have that kind of arena in place and it gets taken away and it almost becomes, it forces the survival mode. And we've spoken about this before, but the forces that survival mode. Do you think we have a risk as professionals in how we contain that survival mode when working with clients?
And I think there is a risk, of course. I mean, in private practice here, which is what I have been doing the last couple of years, it's already, like, in and of itself kind of isolating, which I've always found interesting. So we don't have that opportunity to really speak with other professionals, and then so kind of throwing us into this situation, we have even less opportunity, even though we're taking advantage of the online meetings and everything. That in-person, face-to-face stuff is again, not just with colleagues but with clients, is weighing on a lot of therapists that I've found. But in the context of like being put into survival mode, I mean, I think it's like a natural place to be, and it's like a bridge or a band-aid to a point where we can reintroduce the in-person uh, community. Um,
So the professional community is feeling that angst and potential anxiety because all of the community contact that was in place. And I know from previous conversations that community was quite strong. It was fairly big networking kind of collaborations and community to going to the online. Would you say the numbers have stayed roughly the same going to the online events compared to what they were before?
as far as like getting together with other therapists, yes, actually, it's kind of increased our connections with. So the LA branch of the therapist group is they've a small subset of us have taken to doing 2 meetings a week, and one it's usually on Friday afternoons, and that's dedicated to. It's actually become like a process group for therapists. So we'll do the online stuff, and then we'll talk about all the crap that's really bothering us and get some support around that. So like group therapy for therapists, and then we'll have like a typically on Sunday, I think it's happening. We'll have a more networking kind of event where we're just chat and be friendly, but still.
It seems as though the professional community around yourself is looking at its own structures of support in a way that it may not have been doing before.
Right. Yeah, it is different for sure. And um, when we do tap into that, when I tap into that, it feels some semblance of normality there, just because even though it's through video, it's can still interact. I see all the faces that I'm familiar with,
Yeah.
and that's quite helpful. Yeah.
Do you think part of that kind of approach to let's do more rather than let's do less and let's survive um, is systematic or symptomatic, should I say, of the overall approach to therapy as you've experienced it stateside?
I think that it's yeah, I would say it's symptomatic. In general, I anticipate and have not been let down uh, that therapists would be even more supportive of one another versus another profession, another set of colleagues. And thinking back to one of the other professions I had was as a was a well, an English teacher for adolescents,
Okay.
and even that was a pretty supportive environment, but I think it wouldn't come across the same way as far as the teachers getting together now and making sure everyone is supported through like meetings and such. I do still have friends in that field, and they reporting feeling isolated and overburdened with the new
The new
format of
environment.
teaching. Yeah, and so the point is, I think that uh, the therapeutic profession is definitely more supportive of one another when we do tap into that, when we make uh, the efforts to reach out to one another and reach back.
And I suppose, having worked stateside myself in my early coaching career and seeing how connected professionals kind of reach out in a way that I'd never really experienced in any field before was something quite almost overwhelming at first, because you're not used to the fact that actually other professionals don't see you as competition. They actually see you as how much can they gain from what you know, how much can they
Right.
bring, and work in a very, very collaborative way. But Do you think that stems more from the overall cultural difference in approach to therapy, the approach to self-help, or the cultural kind of makeup? What are your thoughts?
I think yeah, there's definitely like the therapeutic realm, the healing realm is attracts a certain type of person, um, and that is one who likes to give support and care to others.
Yeah.
And when you have like a room full of people, and that's their foundation, it's really kind of a, dare I say, a magical experience when you're surrounded by all this, not just professional knowledge, but deeply caring individuals.
Mm.
In fact, it was just a quick story. When I started my a doctoral program about almost 4 years ago, and when I did it, um, up until that point, I didn't know what it meant uh, to be in a close knit group of people
Mm.
who you could like turn to and talk to anyone, and everyone was genuinely interested in what you had to say.
Mm.
And most of them, it was a healing environment, so everyone there was doing some form of mental health work or education,
Mm.
whether that was through like nutrition or coaching or psychotherapy. Um, and so being in that place felt um, like freeing, really. And again, it wasn't until I experienced that I got a true understanding of what it could be, what it's like to actually have a community. And it took a majority of my life to finally find that, but I'm glad I did. And I wouldn't want to be in any other profession.
Yeah. And I think when we look at the different dynamics that play out in creating that, and set that environment, allow that environment to grow and flourish, almost start, for me, you start kind of back engineering the ingredients that create that. We start to see the things that in other areas are missing those ingredients.
Right.
And I think when we look at the differences across the therapeutic sector, the experience that you have would lend itself to a very open understanding and acceptance of modality, of practical and clinical use of therapy, without almost you have to do this, then this, then this, then this. It's almost a case of let's look at what the options are and cherry pick so that the environment becomes a lot more supportive. And I've experienced that in a small scale, but you're living it. So what would you say are those strongest ingredients, if you like, that create that environment?
The strongest ingredients that create that supportive environment. That
Yeah, that's a tough one. I know it is.
So how much time do we have now?
You got time.
um, Strongest ingredients. So it's interesting. So I like the term ingredients, and I also think of um, the word elements, and so the elements or ingredients of creating that supportive environment. Yeah, that is a tough one. It's almost, it's hard to put into words because not until you, even when like you're enveloped by the community, there's, I mean, there's warmth, um, and there's like acceptance and understanding. Um, so I'm thinking of right now as we're speaking, I'm putting my mind and my body back into a moment and feeling as though I'm like surrounded. almost feel overwhelmed talking about it because I miss that. And
And it's powerful, isn't it? When the environment works, we don't notice the ingredients. It's a bit like when, when a chef makes a cake, the cake tastes great when all of the elements are there, when all those ingredients are in the right balance, everything else. You don't taste the individual elements. You don't
right,
taste those ingredients. You taste the whole. And what, my take as, I'm not a therapeutic counselor. I'm a coach. And what I see looking in on the US model, and I think it's something that the UK and Europe as a whole can really benefit from, is that understanding that it's not one set of ingredients that create that environment. It's the whole, and it's the fact that at the core of everything that I've experienced stateside and everything that the conversations we've had lend itself to is that everything that Carl Rogers said
yeah,
is almost the nucleus of the American approach. It's not, and maybe desire as much as its function, but it's almost as though this is the nucleus. We need to be congruent about ourselves. We need to be congruent about what we can achieve. We need to be empathic. We need to understand
right,
and have that warmth as individuals. And once you mix that with really solid education, then you can understand what unconditional positive regard can do. And
absolutely,
I think when we look at the work that APA's been doing over the last year, and what the American model kind of demonstrates, is that it's that combination of ingredients that work best when they're all brought to play.
right,
And we know it's not 100% perfect, and we know that the engagement is not 100% where we would all like it to be. But as a general kind of guide as to an approach, my personal view is there is an awful lot that we can learn from having that almost a generic openness to the therapeutic approach. What would you say has been the highlight for you in that environment that you are able to experience that?
So the highlight for me in experiencing like a community was not, I think it's simply that it's finally what I would, if I could build my own community, one that surrounds the ideas of like professionalism and personal life. And I mean, it would look just the way it is now, and in the way that how it comes across from your side as far as APA's mission statement or approach, and that being just like fully integrated, holistic, and all-encompassing, but with enough respect around like individuality and boundaries, but knowing that at any point in time you could pull from any of the elements, ingredients, or components to experience that support and that right, holistic community. Like,
It's a
I can
powerful place
imagine
for a professional to be, isn't it?
it is, yeah.
To kind of know that the support network that is there, that you can play that card. Never work with children and animals, they say. Ollie has now left the room. She's been patiently sat here watching you
Yeah,
poorly. Quite great. Um, but for a professional to be in that environment where they can feel that safety of the professional and the group of professionals around them, I think is really empowering. Do you think that has a direct impact on the client work when that is in place?
absolutely. I believe that because um, we're in the field of community and um, embracing all the unconditional positive regard, um, because we do it with our colleagues, and that naturally expresses itself. I guess, for lack of a better term, it's additional practice, and maybe the integration is a better word for.
Hmm. No, I like that. I like the idea that by integrating how we work with our peers and how
Yes,
we engage with our peers, it does. It's I know Siobhan has said publicly hundreds of times in the past year, congruence is not a cloak that you take off at the end of the day.
right.
And I think when we can demonstrate that congruence with colleagues on a day-to-day basis, because like you say, that environment, that community, that professional community is in place, and the isolation um, isn't as strong as it may be felt in the UK. What would you say, looking at the your perception of the UK's approach and the professional engagements, what would you say from your view is kind of some of the differences that you see?
So I've been following pretty actively uh, UK therapists. Um, don't work with motorcycles either, by the way. Um, so I've been following UK therapists for a while, yet, and I'm starting to get an understanding of how, like, actually, without being there, of course, but how how disparate some of the experiences can be. As far as, like, I remember one of the latest things was I hear people talking about in various online groups, uh, private therapy groups, but still online, I think through Facebook or something, with uh, that they various members in those groups in the UK uh, are not honoring the confidentiality of clients, and um, I guess there's been quite a kerfuffle with the um, with that, and like other therapists attacking some therapists attacking other therapists uh, in these groups that I've only ever seen as highly supportive, and that was a unique uh, thing to realize, because they're, like, for example, I'm part of a number of therapy Facebook groups here in the U.S.,
Mm.
and one of the largest ones has a few thousand people in it, um, and they anytime I want any kind of advice, I can just go there, and about 99% of the time, I'll get, like, within an hour, I'll get like a handful of responses.
Mm.
Whether I'm helping a client find other therapists around the country, or if I have a general clinical question, um, it's very supportive. And uh, I guess for the most part, it's very similar in the UK, like online groups, but there are enough people who are not honoring or respecting that realm of
And I think confidentiality is something that APA has worked um, really, really well. And that's not to kind of blow our own trumpet or kind of anything along those lines, but the confidentiality within APA's open forum has really kind of been held um, almost untouched.
Yeah,
I can't recall a single breach on confidentiality, and it does surprise me how we are informed of those experiences outside of our group. But does that kind of protection of confidentiality that you see in the States and the comparison to the UK, do you see that as a growth potential, or do you see that as quite a destructive potential?
definitely a growth potential, despite there being a big enough percentage of people who uh, breach the confidentiality issue. I think there's plenty, even overwhelming amount of support around that. So, so where I hear about that news is usually through Twitter, and then when one therapist talks about the confidentiality issue, there I see a lot of responses from other UK therapists in support of the person who's like, yeah, the confidentiality should be upheld. And
Mm.
so I definitely uh, see that as a growth potential.
Do you think there's a general misconception about confidentiality online? Whereas, as an example, in the US, confidentiality is something that is hugely tight. It's
Yeah,
it doesn't even become a conversation because it just doesn't happen in the same way. But there's almost a sense in the UK and to a degree in Europe that almost a misunderstanding. If a group is private or it's a closed group, that it's okay because it's only us in the group.
yes,
Um, and there's almost this kind of belief that because that group setting is there, that stops any breaches of confidentiality. Would you say there is that kind of misperception around this kind of almost the settings and the perception of what those settings mean?
yeah. I would say there's a misperception around that, misconception, and I think maybe part of it is related to just the online community in general.
Mm.
Uh, More and more people are growing up in that, were born into that.
Mm.
You and I weren't, obviously, so
Yeah.
we've got some
I,
understanding around.
I know it's hard to believe, guys, okay? But, before 1985, there were people that existed without the internet.
It's crazy, I know, and I'm right there with you. Um,
It's
I was
phenomenal.
born before '85 as well, before
Yeah,
'80.
I am glad that a lot of my early learning was done away from smartphones and the internet.
Yes,
And no, my parents wouldn't be shocked. Yes, but we are in a world where we are under almost constant risk of being um, displayed online forever. Um, and professionals working in that arena and using that medium, um, in my mind, need to be mindful that humans are still humans,
right. Yeah,
and the ability to say something online that you would never say to somebody face to face doesn't stop because what you're saying online is in a closed group.
that actually brings to mind, or back to mind, what you said. Siobhan was saying about congruence, and uh, as much as we can I mean, technically be anonymous online. What does it say for our personal congruency that in this realm I could say whatever the hell I want, but over here we'll have to be me and be polite. And when there's that disconnect, it's like, how do you bridge that?
Yeah.
And um, so yeah, I think that's definitely
I mean,
that plays a role.
yeah, and I think the the understanding of how communication online works, and how, once you press enter, or
Yeah,
you hit the tweet button, or you hit the post button, that information is available forever. It doesn't go anywhere unless
yeah,
somebody else wants it to go somewhere. And it doesn't have to stay in the same medium in which you posted it. And we're seeing now conversations that were recorded 30, 40, 50 years ago are being regurgitated into a context for an argument now.
yeah,
That conversation was never designed or articulated for, but it's being used to prove points in the contemporary situations, and almost always out of context, because it's a snapshot of something that
right.
was decades ago. When we look at the therapeutic arena and we look at the client experience, what, as someone looking into the UK system, what would you say is a difference between the client experience, the outcome of that therapeutic journey, compared to what you experience in the US experience?
Um,
And I know one's perception and one is experience, but understanding the difference in perception, I think, could be quite powerful.
right. Now, I still don't know a whole lot about the experience of clients in the UK with therapists. I'm starting to. I think I'm getting an understanding slowly. I definitely can speak more for the experience for people here.
Yeah.
And
So it's that what's the perception of
okay,
client experience here compared to the lived experience stateside. And the reason that I ask is because I think a lot of people look at the American experience and they create their perception of what the client experience is with the American model,
yeah,
and they match it against the lived experience here. So what I'm kind of looking to do is go, let's flip that round. What is it the other way? So we get an understanding of what the
okay.
perception might be.
For one, so another little story time. I was meeting with some one of my favorite things. Some therapists in Ireland actually, and one of the things they mentioned as far as working with clients was that quite a few therapists in private practice are running the practice out of their home. So people come to the house and they have an office space. And initially, that's like cringeworthy for me. It's like, whoa, really? um, and they were bringing up the idea that so when in doing that, it feels safer for the client to be in a comfortable environment,
Mm.
um, and also far enough away from, like, a lot of villages are quite small in population. So when people come in, there's still obviously a lot of stigma around seeking mental health, and too much focus on like prescriptions. Like, we'll just throw a pill at it and it'll be taken care of. In fact, along those lines, this therapist uh, was telling me that often when people come to see him, the first thing they'd ask is, I'm just come here for some medication and then I'll leave. And uh, I think just goes to say, talk about the stigma that's still heavily present in the UK and Ireland. around that, and trying to do therapists trying to do the best for the client, but faced with this backlash of the medical model approach where we just attack the symptoms. And so I think that lends itself to maintaining that stigma. That's it's still present here. There's still a lot of people who won't seek help, and I think it's more acceptable. It's again from my perception, more acceptable to seek therapy here than it is in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, I know from my experience of kind of my early coaching career, which, you know, in essence, did take, you know, my formative steps were taken in the States. I think there is a generic, almost acceptance that saying I need someone else's input. I need, not always, you know, I need help. I'm not, you know, that.
Right.
I don't think anybody ever kind of goes, I need help. But there is an acceptance that having somebody else's opinion, somebody else's support is okay. And it doesn't have to be pharmaceutically led.
Right.
Stateside. There is still a big market for that, and I understand that.
Yes, absolutely.
And there is a big market within the professionals that are quite happy to sit there and work with that that approach. But as you know, those that have already seen the In Conversation With between Irving de Yalom and Wendy Dryden that was done for APA, Professor Yalom openly says in 15 years he didn't write a prescription. You know, he wasn't going to use medication unless it was facilitated as part of the talking process. Right. And invariably, he didn't need it. So there is a growing kind of understanding that the pharmaceutical approach has its place, but it can't be one-dimensional.
Yeah, it can't be the first response to some kind of anxiety or stuff like that, for sure.
Yeah, and I think, as you pointed out, you know, the Drive UK Europe side of therapy is still a sense of, if I can take a pill, then I'll take the pill. Thank you very much. I don't have to sit here. I don't invest in it. I don't have to talk it. Yeah. I don't want to look in. I don't want to open up that box of nasty stuff if I don't have to. And, you know, even if the box is rattling away inside and it's bursting open, just give me a pill and it will close it down. That's something that I think is a challenge for the sector. And I think in part it will always remain a challenge for the sector, but it will be a bigger challenge because we're not building those support networks that we talked about earlier on.
Yes, right.
And that's, you know, a coach looking into how can we support development. Now, I know you're wanting to explore international working. I know you're wanting to explore engaging with UK, European working models and practices. What would you say is the biggest strength of engaging with the experience that the US has had, as opposed to a UK or a European model alone? And I'm not counting out the UK or European model. What I'm getting at, it's the balance between the two understandings that I know you have.
Yes. So, again, from my perspective, stepping over and working with clients overseas. I'm coming from a more kind of
I've put you on the spot so much in this session. And for me, what I see, as someone that's coached both sides of the pond, I've coached in the Middle East, I've coached through Europe, and I've actually done some coaching in Australia. But what for me is the strength of that experience and that layering is that you have more tools in the toolbox, as it were.
Okay.
To kind of almost flex in a way that without that exposure to different ways of engaging, and more about engaging in the professional arena, with other professionals, is something that I think can only benefit the professionals that work around you, the professionals that you engage with, because you're bringing a much more holistic and a much more open environment to engagements that you have. Would be my sense of the strength of that international experience. My understanding is that as a clinical psychological practitioner, there is a huge difference in outlook, in understanding, but also in flexibility.
Yes.
And I think that blend almost lends itself to hitting the very blend of our humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I've seen in your work is something that screams to me as examples of best practice.
Right.
And a huge amount can be learned, not just from the client experience that clients go through when you work with a professional that has that flexibility, but also from the professionals around you, because it's not, the light on the path isn't only seen by the person holding the torch.
Yes. And so in that context, I'm glad you led with that. So as far as the differences or what I could bring, it's my understanding that when it comes to tools and education for therapists in different countries here in the States, well, let me back up. It's my understanding that in the UK, in order to become a mental health professional, there are various levels. I think level 6 is a bachelor's degree or something like that. And then after you get your bachelor's, of course you're supervised, but that's all you need. And maybe that's enough, I don't know. But in the States, in order to be a mental health professional, you need a master's degree, which would be the equivalent of maybe a level 12. I don't know how that would.
Talking about the levels of therapeutic practice, we could be here for hours.
Right. So that aside, we need a master's degree. In addition to the master's degree, we need a set number of hours to work in face with clients, and that's all those hours are supervised. And at least in California, we need like 200 hours before we graduate with a master's, and then there's another level where we need about 750 hours. Now, you heard that right, it's 750 hours, and then we can get a provisional license, essentially. It's called an associate's, and then we go on further with more hours. And
very much more structured and licensed and tied a lot to to the overall culture of licensing and everything, that is very much the basis of the US medical pathway.
Right.
Uh,
Uh,
and
that's not until
insurance. Let's be honest. A lot of this ties to the guidance of the pharmaceutical and the
yes.
insurance sectors, and that kind of leads us to a question really
Oh,
around
okay.
the DSM kind of approach, and
Yeah.
it's something that globally has now, with DSM-5, really kind of captured the thought process of, is this really the baseline that a therapeutic arena is growing from?
Yeah, I understand that. Often question that myself sometimes. So yeah, so it doesn't stop with the associate level of licensing. After all said and done, we need like 3,000 hours of work with clients before we can sit for like a licensing exam, which then allows us to fully like go on our own and work as individuals in private practice or in the within organizations. But because all that's set in place, um, and knowing what I now know of the UK model, I think there's some like going from one extreme of 3,000 hours to UK bachelor's and a couple hundred hours of supervision. I do know that uh, you need ongoing supervision even after completing those hours and getting the degrees in UK and Ireland, at least monthly, and that's not something we need over here. We don't have to, after we've been licensed, we don't have to see a supervisor. We don't have to get any kind of uh,
And
not like,
it's almost like if you and I were to sit down with a blank piece of paper and go, right, how does this system work better?
yeah,
My instinct would be that we would be cherry picking from both sets of systems,
right,
but we
yeah,
wouldn't be taking a carbon copy of either.
right, yeah,
And it's that blend, and I think the skill set of international working and flexibility means a client engagement is going to be an awful lot more responsive than less responsive.
I
Um,
agree. Yeah,
and I don't want to take away from those amazing professionals out there that are working, one country, one experience. That's not what this conversation is about.
right,
It is about opening up to the fact that international working is something that now, with the online arena, more professionals are having to understand what are the dynamics in the countries where their client is based.
yes,
And understanding that is, again, giving that flexibility to how that professional engages and ultimately the client experience.
hmm,
And for myself, for the team at APA, and I know for Siobhan, she said this time and again, the flexibility of knowledge, the wider that knowledge is, the better the outcome for the client. And it's that
right, yeah,
self-awareness of the professional that leads to the self-awareness of the client, not the
yeah,
other way around.
yeah.
You've almost got to start with the professional having that self-awareness. And that all comes from conversations and being open to those conversations.
And speaking of like the self-awareness component, I don't know about in the UK, but here therapists are encouraged to have their own therapists, which I have my own, and I think that's helped immensely in understanding where, I mean, even the issue of countertransference. So I'm not putting my issues on the client, in
Yeah.
order to keep that from happening, I have to be aware of what's going on inside me
Mm.
actively, like when I'm talking to a client and even before that happens. So if something does come up, I can better manage that. And
Yeah.
um,
And that's part of why APA designed the conversation of discovery as part of its application process. So we can kind of create that first interaction where we can kind of gauge a self-aware response situation.
right.
And you can't get it right 100% of the time.
Hmm.
What we
Right.
can do is get a gauge of self-awareness in a totally different way. And so far, we've been able to very successfully identify those members that they understand their self-awareness, and as you say, manage those potential trigger points from their own experience
Yes.
in a way that doesn't impede on the therapeutic process. And that's the same for coaches. I'm probably one of the very few coaches in the UK who will advocate that if a coach cannot keep their mouth shut, they shouldn't be coaching, because
Good
their
point.
stuff isn't for the client.
Right.
And it becomes a way of kind of forcing that treadmill thinking of, I've got to keep hold of this client, and you then get into the risks around confidentiality of what you've shared with a client. That client's not going to protect your confidentiality. They've got no reason to.
Right. Yeah.
So, it's that understanding, and that comes into the training of professionals. It comes into that environment setting that we know goes on early on. So, I hope, just in this kind of short interaction, we've
Yes.
been able to kind of show that there are differences in perception, there are differences in systems, but ultimately, what unifies the therapeutic practice stateside in UK and Europe is that the really good professionals all understand the same core principles,
Yes.
and the skill set of being able to relay that in a way that's safe for both the professional and the client becomes almost paramount. And I love speaking with you, Paul. The insight that I get on the American approach outside of the coaching arena is always phenomenal. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it as well. The connection we have.
Thank you. We've kind of coming to the end of our time. I really kind of wanted to leave the kind of closing kind of gambit really to you, and give you a chance to kind of sort of let the audience know what your hopes are for the therapeutic sector moving forward.
So I like that you're throwing all these softball questions at me. It's so lovely. They're not in depth or anything, so let's see where we shall begin.
So this is hard talk. This is hardball,
Oh,
and
okay.
I'm going for interviewer of the. No, I'm not.
So my hopes for the growing or evolving the evolving field of like psychotherapy and mental health.
Mm-hmm.
I think just continued growth in the realm of like the holistic model, and because I see the momentum there, and I already see it growing. But I mean, if it grew, I don't know if it can grow any faster. But either way, just continuing on its path. Maybe more uh, highlights or focus on like the integrative approach and being open to like the various forms of various elements of life that that lead to better well-being, and that it's not just the while like medication can be a tool for that. Um, I think that's more of a last resort in most cases. So more about looking at people's lifestyle and like their sleep habits, their nutrition, their community, their where they find meaning in life, um, how they connect with nature, and how they move their body and experience like peace and serenity and relaxation, even if those moments are fleeting. Getting glimpses of that can build momentum,
Yeah.
and uh, it's more, I believe, like a lifestyle approach, and like being able to dance, like move your body in any way that's it's meaningful for you, that allows you to have that.
Yeah, it's a long time since I've danced. Let's not go down the dance route.
Well, but flailing is still movement and
Yeah,
relaxing. So
I think the last time I actually went dancing, somebody thought I was having a fit. They called paramedics. Uh, but no, I think you're spot on, and I think it ties in exactly where Siobhan and I are working towards with APA. It's very much that collaborative engagement.
yes,
It's that understanding that the human condition is not just the physical, but it's the physical, the psychological, and the emotional. And if
right,
we're not going to work with all three elements, we are always going to be out of balance. And whatever modality, whatever kind of point of focus that somebody has that works for them, everything will always come down to those three elements being nurtured and maintained in a way that is beneficial to that individual. And if we're not going to be PC, person-centered approach with every single engagement,
right,
we are never ever going to get to a point where we have individuals that can nurture their own self-awareness. And that starts, in my mind, that starts from day one. You know,
yes,
if we build that environment into the life of every child as they grow, it almost puts the therapeutic community out of work if it wasn't for the fact that humans can be really nasty to each
right, yeah,
other. But it builds resilience. It means that we're able to cope with things that are thrown at us in a different way. It builds understanding, and it builds the connections between individuals and the world around them in a way that, I think the potential is absolutely massive. It's why Vonnie and I do what we do. But thank you so much for your time.
oh,
Um,
thank you, yeah,
it's a pleasure as always. And for anybody that has watched the video, if you feel that you have gained from the conversation, that it can impact on your professional engagements, then you can get the CPD certificate for this video. Just go to the Apple website, download the CPD questionnaire, and get that in. No CPD is offered, no CPD certificate, sorry, is offered by ANA psychological accreditation unless it's verified. It's not a case of watch a video, get a certificate. If you benefit from that video, then let us know. You get that certificate. So, Paul, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you'll be joining us on the live link on the 4th.
I will, yes, I'll be
And
there.
fabulous. And for everyone that's watching this, thank you so much. We will see you, or as many of you as possible, in the live birthday party. Well, as this goes out, if you're watching this on the premiere, we'll see you later today. If you're watching on the replay, hope we'll see you on the replay of the party. But for now, Paul, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care now.